Hey, I'm Will LaVeist. He's Eric ClaVille. You're tuned into LaVeist and ClaVille, where we give it to you straight the way it is from a Black male's perspective. So let's get right to it. Today's show, we're talking about Black athletes, HBCUs, and March Madness of this NCAA. We're right now in the season now, the March Madness basketball tournament. And unfortunately, Norfolk State was in the heat, was in the hunt, but got knocked out by the number one powerhouse, Gonzaga. But it brings to bear the issue of, as you see all of these athletes, many of these predominantly white schools, and you see a lot of the athletes are predominantly Black. And you get to wonder, you say, well, what if the Black athletes started returning to the HBCUs? Would it be so unusual to see a school like Norfolk State, fine university, graduating, quality students all the time? But what if it wasn't such an anomaly to say, oh, Norfolk State is a Cinderella team, and
right,
whether or not they're going to make it? So I think it was journalist Jamel Hill, I think a year or so ago, wrote something about this. Other journalists have been writing about this. Bill Rhoden, William Rhoden has been writing about this issue, because there was a time when the best and brightest and most talented of our athletes in the Black community went and came out of HBCU.
Absolutely.
Because there weren't any options or many options for them available to play at the predominantly strong, better funded white universities. And yet still, HBCUs were sending some of these athletes and continue to send these athletes to the highest levels of athletic competition. You got Jerry Rice, Mississippi Valley State, HBCU grad,
Walter Payton.
Walter Payton. You got a young man right now, North Carolina A&T, who's playing for the Chicago Bears. Tariq, what's Tariq's last name? Tariq, we'll get his last name. I'm sorry, I'm not remembering, but I mean, there's a lot of athletes right now that are in the league. So when you see this March Madness and how much money it's making for the universities, you begin to wonder, well, what if the athletes started returning to the HBCUs?
Will, that's Tariq Cohen.
Right, Tariq Cohen.
Phenomenal athlete. But, you raise a very important point, because keep in mind, it wasn't that long ago that Black athletes were not allowed, or African Americans themselves were not allowed on major campuses of state universities, which we know today and we call PWIs, or predominantly white institutions, right? So with that being the case, what we now see is that because of the money revenue that generates through those universities in bringing the best athletes to their universities in these major sports, this is what happens. Some people, of course, you had schools like in the North and the Northeast, and in the Midwest, like Ohio State, who had athletes. Of course, we know about Jesse Owens running for the Ohio State University.
Jim Brown played a ball for Syracuse, right?
Absolutely.
So there have been a few trickled in there, and a lot of times, like you said, a lot of them are coming from the North or the Midwest.
Yeah. And then let's not forget about the great athletes that came out of San Francisco University, right?
Bill Russell, right?
Absolutely, played basketball during that time period, and then went to the Celtics and won, Mr. Championship. I think 11 or titles in 13 years, 12 years.
Got more than everybody else, still.
Right.
Still.
Absolutely. So, but to your point, when they saw the opportunity to generate more revenue and income, that's when the economic decision to include Black Americans overrode the ideology of white supremacy, the ideology of white only. Okay?
Right.
Keep in mind, I've always said that slavery was a business decision. When it came down to it, they knew it was wrong. The Founding Fathers knew it was wrong. But because of the amount of money it was bringing in, they said, listen, we can't let this go. So they allowed the incorporation of slavery into our American fabric, and we're still suffering from that today. So when we talk about universities, I just want to bring this statistic up. Think about it. Abilene Christian president estimates, and this was just quoted on the 20 or just this week. Abilene Christian president estimates that the school's improbable NCAA men's basketball tournament victory netted them over $100 million.
Will 100.
$100 million.
Right, in exposure, marketing, all of these things that they don't have to do. They don't have to spend media, but just the exposure and the name of this relatively small,
absolutely, very
Christian school, private Christian school, which on its enrollment numbers are no larger than some of the, slightly larger than what my alma mater, Lincoln University, is around 3,000 or so. In that range, give or take between years 2,000 and 3,000 or so. I mean, that's where they're at. And North Carolina A&T is actually largest at 10,000. So like you're saying, that kind of exposure is priceless,
It's immeasurable. It's immeasurable. And think about this, Will, the amount of, and just to kind of bring it home for you, the amount of money that the NCAA tournament itself is poised to make this year is $700 million, right? So, and there's a revenue sharing that goes back and forth. So that's why when you look at universities like University of Alabama, who is in Alabama, most athletes on the team are African American. You look at these teams winning over and over again, but when you go on the campus of these universities, you're like, where are the Black people?
Right.
I mean, you see a few sprinkled here, a few by the student union, gathered together here and so forth. But then when you go, of course, to the athletic unit, or I call it a compound, because of all of the amenities that they have.
Right.
That's where you find all the Black athletes or Black students.
So you look at percentages, like the Black athletes are 80 to 90% on the team.
Easily.
But then when you go to the rest of the
60%, 65.
It's totally flipped the other way when you look at the general student body. So the Black athlete is overrepresented, in the athletic department compared to the percentage of the university. And it's also interesting you mentioned slavery, because when you talk about NCAA and the system and the way that it's set up, it's the system that's still with us that most resembles the indentured servant or slave system, because you have the workers, the primary workers, which are the athletes playing on the field of play, producing the content, producing the product, right? Yeah. Not getting paid. So you have these athletes, you don't have to pay them. They're producing your product. And then you get to pay everyone around them, and all of the systems around them gets paid hand over fist. Yeah. Over and over and over again in multiples. But the main core worker, right, is not paid. So
and Will, when people make the argument, say, well, they're getting a free education, let's keep in mind, most of these athletes qualify for Pell Grant. And, a lot of these are state institutions. So if they go in state, more than likely they'll be able to handle that cost through Pell Grant eligibility and just small student loans at that. But the other part of this big issue is that the amount of work that's given, and it's not indentured servitude, it actually models slavery, because you're not getting paid, right? So let's not confuse.
Let's not sugarcoat it.
Let's not sugarcoat this thing.
It's modeled off of the plantation system.
Look, I remember Brian Bosworth, the star linebacker from Oklahoma, when he wore his NCAA T-shirt and what it stood for, right? He talked about communism and the like, not having freedom to do certain things. And that's very true. When you couple those two ideas together, that's exactly what the NCAA is. And right now, they're under threat because you have these Power Five, these power conferences that can actually form their own conference and make money themselves. I mean, look, you've got the ACC channel. You got the SEC network. I mean, you can sit down in front of that network all day and look at a different story about great athletes that came out of SEC and not even flip to anything that NCAA is doing as it relates to that and on that level. But
go ahead.
No, I was going to say, But the value of bringing a resurgence of coming back to HBCUs and our athletes coming back to the communities that actually help them to get to that level would be monumental to our institution. But I want to talk about our institutions taking advantage and capitalizing on this and working itself through capacity. But go ahead.
Yeah, because you raise an excellent point there. When you talk about these conferences have the ability to actually go off and do their own thing.
Yeah.
And that's very much the difference that we see like in this era that we're in with the internet, the ability to be seen as an athlete through YouTube, through all other channels, all these other means. I mean, I remember I grew up playing ball growing up in New York City. I mean, we all who came up in the hood were either looking at playing ball or music, those kinds of limited professions. But ball was definitely something that helped me to get into college. I was by no means a top recruit, 5-star, any of that. But in that era, we didn't.
Don't be modest, Will.
Well, I'll get played. I went to the only 4-year school that recruited me. I got recruited by a bunch of JUCOs, junior colleges, but I went to the only 4-year school that recruited me, and I probably should have went to the junior colleges because if I understood the system clearly, that was definitely a viable way because a lot of athletes had gone that way. But the thing I'm trying to point out is that in that era, you didn't have YouTube where you can put your video up and people can be able to see you or know you or whether you can play without having to come and see you. In my era, coming up in the 80s like that, you had to go and travel and see the player, or you had to go by what people were saying. And so you had this sort of limited channel. We're now in an era where almost no matter where you play, if you got a game, the league is going to find you. If you got a game, you want to be found. You don't even have to go to the college route in order to get to the pros. We got LaMelo Ball right now who's playing in the NBA. His father, as much as people may not like his father and his being boisterous and all of this, his father understood some things about the game and said that this is not the only route to go to the NCAA, Division I, so forth. But there are other routes to where
He took his son overseas to play.
That's right. He took his son overseas to play, and now his son is now in the NBA and now is a Rookie of the Year candidate.
Balling out.
Because he had game. So that same son could have gone to an HBCU and balled out, and he would have been seen. So we're in an era now where, and again, the attention is coming on to HBCUs, people recognizing the quality of these institutions in terms of an education. If you now bring that into the athletics, we already stated that guys have been coming out of HBCUs and doing phenomenal for generations. That's nothing new. So as an athlete, you're still going to be seen, and you can go to an institution that may be more comfortable for you in terms of your culture and see you more as a full person, come out and actually get a degree, still be seen, still can go to the league and do your, fulfill your career as an NBA player, NFL player, or whatever. It's a much more viable option because all of these other channels, like you said, this is a different era. People are going to see you anyway. You're going to be seen anyway.
Well, you bring up, again, a lot of great points. I want to go back to LaMelo Ball and his father, right? Like you said, for about a couple of years, he was everywhere. ESPN, every news clip that came out, he was on there. Talking trash, talking head, what we do on the court, right?
Joining being a marketer. He was being a marketer.
Exactly.
P.T. Barnum, he's being a marketer.
As a matter of fact, I enjoyed him because it brought memories back of how we used to go after each other on the school bus, just talking smack.
Yep, the cousins, trash talking, exactly.
Yeah, that was it. Very, very harmless, just good fun, right? But he used that, like you said, to market. He was a brilliant business marketer. Right now, some of the products that came out, there's questions there about quality and so forth, but creating their own brand, the BBB brand. I mean, and then of course his son drops the rap album and things of that nature and so forth. So he was using that, like you said, not just to get his sons in the NBA, because he said all three of my sons gonna be in the NBA. Right. Now, what father can say that? right? And then now you have LeBron, who's going to really push the father-son narrative with the opportunity for he to be in the NBA and play with his son on the same court, which is amazing. We saw that in baseball, of course, with the Griffins, Ken Griffey.
Right.
But how many people can say that, right? So they're pushing the narrative. And again, when we talk about HBCUs, I want to go back to capacity to handle this. Now, people say, oh, well, what about capacity? But you just simply destroyed that fallacy, right? I mean, first of all, what HBCUs have been doing with our great athletes, I mean, every day we see it, right? And then our past athletes who came from HBCUs who are Hall of Famers. We talked about it in football, right? In basketball, it's the exact same thing, these major sports. So, these are opportunities where we can push the narrative, right? We can push the narrative. We can push and then drive our own narrative. Push it, drive it, and capitalize on it. Now, the capacity to do it is the ability for a few institutions to understand, hey, let's do this, let's do it the right way, and be that model, right? So I think this is also a great opportunity for athletes and former athletes to help to develop. And I'll give the example of Deion Sanders.
Exactly.
Right now, every major, well, I'm not going to say every major, but you have ex-NFL players that are trying to duplicate what Deion Sanders is doing. They're applying for head coaching jobs just because they play the NBA. I mean,
and this is a guy that went across the street. His school, Florida State University, across the street from FAMU. Yeah. So he wasn't. He was on FAMU's campus a whole lot. We know that for sure. But you're absolutely right, because all of us, whether you went to an HBCU or not, you're touched by somebody in your family, somebody in your community, which touched. So it's an institution that you still have a responsibility to. And Deion is showing that. Let me bring my skill set back to bear into an institution that could really benefit from the skills that I have. The other thing that that really hit me about this, when you talk about like the different era and you talk about capacity, look what COVID has shown us about capacity and about the value of the stadium. Think about this for a second. We've been watching basketball games, right? Quality games without people in the stands, without huge crowds.
That's right.
So when you now talk about, I need this huge capacity stadium on my campus in order to have a quality team, I don't think so. COVID has shown you that you don't really need all of that capacity in the stadium. There's other multiple ways to do it, through screens, through all kinds of other creative ways to recreate that kind of atmosphere. And for a lot of these guys that come out of the AAU system, where they're used to playing in these tournaments, and it's basically their family members there and so forth, and they don't need all these huge stadiums. Once you're on the court, half of that ambiance kind of even goes away for you. Once you're on the court and you're really into the heat of the game. So we just watched the NBA have a quality playoff season and championship season played before virtually no audience. So when you talk about an HBCU like Howard or Hampton or any of these campuses that don't have the larger stadiums like the University of Arizona, another one of my alumni, you don't really need that. COVID has shown us that this is, again, a new normal. A lot of things that we thought we were relying on, we really don't need.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I want to bring this point up, that I want to go back to the discussion about athletes. Now, I want you to understand that currently in the NBA, there are only 2 HBCU alumni playing in the NBA right now. Mm-hmm. One is Kyle O'Quinn from Norfolk State University, where I'm currently a professor and also director. And then also Robert Covington from Tennessee State University, which, of course, is the university where Oprah Winfrey is, I guess, the most famous alumni. Yes, Oprah Winfrey is HBCU graduate for all our audience to hear. But keep in mind that a lot of African HBCU athletes prior to the NBA-ABA merger didn't get a lot of attention from the NBA.
Right.
So they went to the ABA, to showcase a lot of their talent. But I also want to give a list of current and past NBA greats that came from HBCUs. Who can forget about Anthony Mason, the enforcer for the Knicks?
That's right.
Tennessee State, right? Who forget about Charles Oakley, the other enforcer for the Knicks?
Virginia Union.
Who can forget?
But you got to. I know you're going to say my idol, Earl of Pearl Monroe, and where he came.
Earl of Pearl Monroe and Willis Reed. Willis Reed out of Grambling State, right? You got to beat me to it. Who forget about Bob Dandridge? Again, another great player in the NBA, Washington Bullets at that time, Norfolk State University, right? Bob Love, Southern University at A&M College, my alma mater. Earl of Pearl Monroe, absolutely. Salem State University.
Salem State.
Ben Wallace, again from Virginia Union, who won the title, one of the greatest defensive players in the history of the game, especially at his height. I mean, one of the greatest players who came out of Virginia Union. Sam Jones, North Carolina Central. Willis Reed, I mentioned Willis Reed. Everybody remember Willis Reed when the Knicks were a great
Another
team?
One of my idols, yeah.
He came out hobbling, scored the first 2 buckets and went back, and that really catapulted and moved them into winning that particular title. But, MVP, NBA MVP, Finals MVP, All-Star. This guy here did it all and came directly from HBCU. But then I want to take a quick look at some icons, man. Think about some current icons, Will. I mean, in football, we see them all the time on TV. We look at these guys and we're like, oh, where'd they go to school? And when we finally say they went to HBCU, you're like, oh, I didn't know that, right? But look at Michael Strahan from Texas Southern, right? We're straight out of the SWAC. Who can forget about Mel Blount, the great defender, right? I mean, you think some of these guys, these QBs, these cornerbacks were bad. Mel Blount was an enforcer, straight out of Southern University, played again for the Steelers. Track and field, again, Tennessee State. We look at Ralph Boston. Right. We talked about Willie Brown over at Grambling State. Lou Brock, the great Hall of Famer in baseball. And we forget about baseball, man. A lot of our great players.
Exactly. But you didn't mention Art Shell, first African-American coach in the modern era. Art Shell went to UMES, University of Maryland, Eastern Shore. I know for sure because that's where my brother's alum at University of Maryland, Eastern Shore. And then you got Fitz Pollard, if you want to go way, way back, Fitz Pollard.
Oh, man,
first NFL coach, first Black NFL coach.
Yeah.
But where did he coach prior to that? Lincoln University, the Lincoln University of Pennsylvania.
I was going to mention Monty Irvin that came out of MLB. So again, we have these great players. Sam Jones. We talk about Walter Payton, sweet feet out of Jackson State University. Willis Reed again out of Grambling State. Jerry Rice out of Mississippi Valley State. Now Mississippi Valley, there's challenges in the Delta in Mississippi. Mississippi Valley has put out some really good athletes, and we see it. Wilma Rudolph, the great Renaissance woman out of Tennessee State University. So again, I just wanted to give our audience an opportunity to hear these names that we hear all the time, and we never associate with HBCUs, but that's exactly where they got their start. Right. So I believe in looking at that list, Will, I believe that the top athletes, African-American athletes, can truly form partnerships with HBCUs.
Absolutely.
And really help to benefit not only themselves, but also to benefit the universities and continue to pour into the communities that help bring them up, the communities that help to nourish their skill, help to nourish them as great citizens and young men and great young women. And then it's a win-win across the board. So HBCU and top Black athletes are something that we can see coming together once again and creating that legacy here in the 21st century.
And I think that last year, we got the 5-star recruit, McCord Maker, who made a decision and really, opened up a lot of eyes.
Absolutely.
He's decided that he was going to go to Howard University. Now, unfortunately, Howard had to suspend their season because of COVID. And his I don't want to call it braveness. I want to call it foresight
That's right.
to see exactly what you just finished talking about, going through the list and seeing the importance and the quality that he can still get absolutely by attending an HBCU from both an academic, cultural, and also athletic standpoint. And so hopefully others will see his example and follow his example. Again, this season, he didn't get a chance to show what he can do, but that's been the case for a lot of people because of the pandemic. So we're looking forward to what will come of that, in the coming seasons. And wouldn't it be great that he didn't just do a one and done, that he would actually stay, or that as a result of that experience at Howard, that he would continue, even if he goes into the NBA early, that he would continue his education. That's another thing that, like you said, a lot of the students are not actually graduating. They're using the platform to be able to get them to the next level. But if they don't make it to the next level, then what? I think that there's an opportunity for partnership, like you said, from these athletes to talk, who have been there, done that, know the game, know the pitfalls, know how to navigate, to be able to say, hey, we can develop a real true partnership here where our athletes are graduating or still continuing their education, even as they're continuing in their fields of endeavor. I think a lot about Isaiah Thomas, who did not go to an HBCU, but after he graduated from, Indiana, he still went on and continued his education.
Absolutely.
And I think that that's key. And those are the kinds of partnerships and the kinds of things that could be put together to make sure that our athletes not only get a full cultural, intellectual experience, they can pursue their athletic careers if that's what they want to do, but most importantly, graduate and go on and do great things for the community.
Absolutely. You mentioned Isaiah Thomas. I know he has a master's degree from Berkeley. And again, he talks about where he came from. A lot of athletes and a lot of individuals come from challenging backgrounds.
Straight from the hood in Chicago, absolutely.
Yeah, and to see what he's accomplished post, we know about the accomplishments of Michael Jordan and others, and Kenny Smith and all these people who had trained Charles Barkley and Shaquille O'Neal into the entertainment and business side. But education is what we don't hear a lot, and you're exactly right. Again, Shaquille O'Neal actually has his doctorate degree that he also worked and received. So again, all of these educational benefits I think are key. I believe that the partnerships are key. And I believe that not only can this bring to light a resurgence of coming back to HBCUs, and a lot of great light have been placed on the great work that has been done, especially with Mackenzie Scott, the former wife of Jeff Bezos, and her foundation and what she's done and given just one person. We talked about that before, highlighting, saying these are the criteria that we're looking for. Hey, we like what you're doing. Continue to do it. Here's $40 million.
So ClaVille, as we wrap and we think about, well, what can Black people do or should Black people do when it comes to this issue? I think one of the things that comes to mind for me, absolutely, is that alumni of HBCUs need to absolutely dig into their pockets and start giving back. Because what happens in all of these programs that have been built is because of capital campaigns that have happened, things that have been done to upgrade the facilities to be able to attract the top athletes, and all of these types of things, be able to provide funding to take care of some of their financial, difficulties. So if the alumni turn around and take care of their own and build up these universities and support these universities and become booster clubs that legally support these kinds of programs, then you will have the top athletes coming. You had the facilities, and then we can use what's going on in athletics to be a marketing tool, which is what all of these NCAA March Madness presidents are talking about. How much marketing and exposure and how the enrollment increases because of the exposure. So it's incumbent on us as alumni to get back. And you need to don't give back what somebody else is telling you should give. You need to look at your own budget and decide today what I'm going to start giving, and then graduate from there. So if it's only 50 that you can give starting today, then you start on that today and then say, I'm gonna get to 100, I'm gonna get to 500, I'm gonna get to 1,000, I'm gonna go beyond. But start today. Alumni have to give back.
Absolutely. But also alumni have to be shown a way that works for them. And again, I use this model. If you have 10,000 alumni, $50 a year, that's $500,000. Mm. And you just simply raise it from that. $5 a month, is $60 a year. And again, just look at the amount of money that generates. But now in philanthropy, in philanthropic giving, persons want to give the causes, not institutions. Mm-hmm. So what is the cause? And again, developing that partnership, developing the plan, and then developing how that partnership and plan can benefit both university, the alumni, and the athletes is key to the success in this effort. Thank you again for joining us for this conversation with LaVeist and ClaVille as we talk about HBCUs and the value of Black athletes. Join us next time and follow us on our Facebook. Like and share there, Instagram, Twitter. And if you have a question, you can always reach out to us at LaVeistandClaVille@gmail.com. Until next time, that's the way it is. We'll see you.